Hello everybody and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and today on Wars and Empires we'll be talking about some of these strategies and tactics used in the ancient and medieval era. Number 1. The phalanx and the shield wall. Some might argue that there are the differences between phalanx and the shield wall, however the main principle remains the same and their strengths and weaknesses are relatively the same. The idea behind these two formations is that when they engage with the enemy, they try to either hold them in place or break through the formation using discipline and brute force. However, the biggest weakness with these formations is that if they get outflanked or get hammer and anviled from the rear, then the formation will collapse and turn into a rout. Number 2. Echelon formation, or also known as the oblique order. The oblique order, or echelon formation, was used to great effect at the Battle of Leuctra, when Epaminondas reinforced his left flank, and then engaged the left flank with the Spartan right and broke through their lines. Thus, he was able to win the battle without engaging his center or right flank. The idea behind this formation is that you reinforce one of your flanks, and then use that flank without engaging your other fronts to break through the enemy and winning the battle for you. Number 3. Hammer and Anvil. Hammer and anvil tactics were used by Alexander the Great and many others, but we will use his battles for an example. For example, at the Battle of Gaugamela, when Alexander the Great routed King Darius III, he then wheeled his cavalry around and charged into the Persian right flank, which were about to overwhelm his own left flank. He didn't envelop them, he just hid them and broke their morale, obviously from the rear. The idea behind this formation is that your frontline troops have to hold the enemy long enough for your horsemen to come in from the rear and charge and break the enemy, and thus winning the battle for you. Number 4. The flying wedge formation, or the wedge formation. The idea behind this formation is that your best troops form into arrow or spear tip shape formations. Then they charge forward and break through the enemy lines. For example, at the Battle of Watling Street, when the Romans were fighting Queen Boudica, they were able to form up in a really defensible position, where they had trees to their flanks and their rear. When the Briton forces attacked, the Romans were able to charge forward and break through and slaughter them because of the wedge formation. However, the biggest weakness with the wedge formation is that if it does charge forward and penetrates through the front line, if there are concentrated reserves in that area and then they charge, they could easily blunt the tip of the wedge, thus nullifying its only advantage, and then they could easily wrap around the flanks and force the formation to collapse in on itself. Number 5. Concentrated center formation. The idea behind the concentrated center formation is that you put most of your punching power into your own front line, while weakening your flanks at the same time. This is a risky formation because if your flanks get overwhelmed, then you could get surrounded from all three sides, and if the enemy have horsemen, then you can easily get surrounded in the rear, and thus your entire army could get destroyed. However, this tactic was used by great effect by the Romans at the Battle of Dertosa, also known as the Battle of Ibera, where the Romans deployed in this same formation, the same one that they used at the Battle of Cannae. However, the Carthaginians deployed the same formation they did under Hasdrubal Barca. They deployed the same formation that they did at the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal was able to beat the Romans. However, this time the Romans were able to punch through the Carthaginian center, thus winning the battle. Number 6. Double envelopment and single envelopment formations. Now, the reason why I'm going with first concentrated center then double envelopment is so that you could see that these two formations, none of them are bad and none of them are the best. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. For example, at the Battle of Cannae, we can see how Hannibal was able to masterfully surround the Romans and thus destroy their army. However, we also see that Hasdrubal wasn't able to pull off the same thing at the Battle of Ibera. The same thing could be used or said about the Romans, for they tried to use the same tactic that the Romans did at their Tosa, at Cannae, but they failed. The only way you can actually pull off a double envelopment or single envelopment formation is if you have strong morale on your troops and they're really confident in their general and really good commanders. For if the commanders cannot break away or stop their men from routing or overextending, then the formation will collapse in on itself and you will lose the battle. And if your troops are inexperienced, then they will rout and thus also losing you the battle. The idea, another thing about this formation is that, for example, the same thing, at the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal's center had to hold long enough to stop the Roman legions, so that the flanks could come around and hit them in the rear and the flanks, thus winning the battle. If the center does not hold, then the formation will collapse and the battle is lost. Number 7. Anchoring flank tactic. This strategy was used at the Battle of Uhud, where the Muslims under the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were fighting the Meccan polytheists. The Muslims had around 700 men, while the Meccans had around 3,000. To beat back the Meccan number advantage, the Muslims decided to go in between two mountains to protect their flanks. Even though their left flank was kind of exposed, they put archers there. Thus, at the first stages of the battle, they were successfully able to beat back and almost win the battle by nullifying the advantage of the Meccan infantry. We will talk about the Battle of Uhud at a later date, inshallah. Another example used for this could be the Battle of Thermopylae, where the Greek alliance forces were able to hold off the Persian advance by concentrating their troops at a narrow pass at the Hot Gates. I mean, we all know what happened next, but the initial stages of the battle matter. Another example of this could be used at the Battle of Pharsalus, where Julius Caesar anchored his left flank near the river, thus denying Pompey Magnus, from outflanking him on the left flank, as in from Julius Caesar's point of view. Number 8. Ambush tactic. Now, the ambush tactic is really hard to implement, but if you can pull it off, then good for you. And I don't think it's going to be really hard doing that against the Romans, especially when you're fighting the Romans and you're Hannibal. One of the best examples for the ambush tactic is at the Battle of the Trebia River, where Hannibal was able to bait the enemy, as in the Romans, to cross the river and attack his front line, and then he was able to send his troops from around their flank and then hit them in the rear, as in the ambush, for his own troops were waiting for them in the gorge with 4,000 men under his brother's command, and then they were able to pop out and charge the enemy's rear, as in the Romans. Another example for this ambush tactic is at Hannibal's ambush at Trasimene. The only way you can pull off this tactic is if you can pull the enemy to your own favorable terrain, and if the enemy has really bad intelligence. Another thing, well, actually I think those are the only two things really. Another example for this could be used at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, where Arminius was able to trick the Romans into a narrow forest path where they were attacked from all sides and thus beaten. Another example of the ambush tactic could be used at the Battle of Walaja, where Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu was able to form up his men and send his cavalry around the Sassanid rear. Obviously the Sassanids didn't know about it because Khalid's cavalry were hiding behind the hill. When the Sassanids attacked, Khalid bin Walid was able to hold his formation for long enough for the cavalry to get over the hill and then hit the Sassanids in the rear, thus winning him the battle. It is really difficult to pull off this formation or this strategy, because for this to be actually pulled off, the timing has to be perfect. For if they are too early, then the enemy can easily reform and get out of the field of battle before they get outflanked. And if they are too late, then their own formation, the one that was supposed to hold the enemy, will have collapsed, and there will be nothing to hit in the rear. These are not the only formations that were used in the ancient and medieval times, and we will cover more in our part 2 of the video. If you liked it, please like the video and subscribe for more historical content on wars and empires. We'll see you next time, and have a good day, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.